Call to order, regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for November 19th, 2018. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus?
Here.
Mr. Fritzen?
Here.
Mr. McBride?
Here.
Mrs. Cummings?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Mr. Preston? Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
We'll begin with a pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We've had 4 requests for public comment tonight, and we will take those in the order in which the requests were received. Our first speaker is Patty Fountain. And you can, probably the center one, that's the one I see the light on. And I'd ask you to state your name and address for the record, if you would. And we hold people's comments to 3 minutes, just a reminder.
My name is Patricia Fountain, and I live at 1423 West Hovey, apartment 20 in Normal. So first of all, I want to say good evening and thank you for allowing me to come speak on behalf of the Tobacco 21 Committee at Illinois State University. We wanted to be heard on the important issue of raising the minimum purchase age for tobacco and tobacco-related products to 21. Raising the minimum legal sale age to tobacco 21 products, or as it's more formally known, tobacco 21, is an important emerging policy strategy to reduce smoking that complements and builds upon proven effective approaches. Not only will raising the tobacco sale age to 21 have substantial positive impact on the health of the public, but it will also save lives. The momentum for Tobacco 21 was strengthened in 2015 with the release of an Institute of Medical report. This report predicted that by raising the tobacco sale age to 21 nationally, over time it would reduce the smoking rate by 12% and smoking-related deaths by 10%. More impactful still, when you look at the numbers, are the results in Evanston, Illinois. This was the first city in Illinois to pass a local Tobacco 21 policy in October of 2014, and since the ordinance was passed, the use of all tobacco products by high schoolers, such as cigarettes, e-cigarettes, and hookah, has decreased by 37.5% from 2015 to 2017. In recent years, at least 270 localities in more than a dozen states have enacted ordinances or issued regulations raising the minimum age for tobacco sales to 21, including 27 in Illinois alone. And since 2015, 6 states have made this a statewide law. So tobacco kills 480,000 people each year, and this is more than automobile crashes, gun violence, and opiate overdoses combined. The developing teenage brain is particularly vulnerable to the effects of nicotine, and more than 95% of addicted smokers started before the age of 21. So unless there is a trajectory change, tobacco addiction will dramatically shorten the lives of 5.6 million kids alive today, and that would be like losing the whole state of Colorado. Even though we have seen smoking rates declining in the U.S. in the last 5 years, e-cigarette use has exploded since 2014, threatening to undo our progress. FDA Commissioner Scott Gledib has called youth use of e-cigarettes an epidemic and indicated that youth e-cigarette use is up 77% since last year. This is why we encourage the inclusion of all tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, when raising the tobacco sale age to 21. Now, I've given you a lot of general information about the harms of tobacco in other towns, how they've seen change, but I haven't really talked about how it relates to Normal and Bloomington specifically. So according to the 2018 Illinois Youth Survey of McLean County, 18% of 10th graders and 30% of 12th graders reported using any tobacco or vaping products. That's a 12% increase in 2 years. A 2018 needs assessment conducted by a group of Illinois State students showed that of the 1,372 people who completed the survey, 57% of participants, a majority from Normal and Bloomington, strongly favor or somewhat favor raising the minimum purchasing age for tobacco products. The survey showed that also of those who identified as tobacco users, 91 of them started before the age of 21.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mark Tiratilli.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be here at the last meeting. I want to say thank you for the property tax levy not going up. That's a long time coming. Thank you so much. I would encourage the council to continue to look at pensions. They are going to be a big problem, and we need to find other ways besides property tax. But again, thank you for that. I'm here tonight to speak against the proposed ordinance for the short-term rental tax. There's several reasons why. First off, this is coming from the hotel industry. It's proposed in the interest of a, quote, level playing field. I would agree that the playing field is not level. It is heavily favored in favor of the corporate interests. If you look at the millions of dollars in free land local hotels have been given, the rebates on sales and property taxes, the outright grants of over $1 million to some of these projects. Heck, it's in the bills for payment tonight, nearly $20,000 to the Radisson in a rebate. There is a lot of favor given to the existing hotel industry. You've stated in the packet that the amount of money here is inconsequential. It's on the order of $7,000. It is not cutting into their business in any significant way. That money, however, is important to the local resident who is trying to get ahead. And I know that you'll say that this is not a tax on them, that it's being paid for by the renter, but this is plain and simple a tariff. Okay, there's a competing product, and you're trying to make it less competitive by imposing a tax upon it. This is a tariff. At any time you put a tax or a tariff on something, you get less of it. You are going to suppress the short-term rental industry by the independents here in this town. That sends a huge message. I think that's the decision in front of you tonight, is whose side are you on? Are you going to favor large corporate interests? Are you going to favor the resident of this town who's trying to make ends meet? That's all this is about. It's not about the money. It's strictly about the aggressiveness of the hotel industry. There's other concerns that I have. They're a little bit more legal and esoteric in nature. The idea that this is a privilege, that these people have a privilege of renting their rooms out. It's been well established since before our Constitution that people have a right to engage in commerce. It is not a privilege. The government has the power to regulate it, but it is a right, not a privilege. I strongly oppose the implications of the wording of this ordinance. Further, the collection of the tax. It's supposed to go through Airbnb, VRBO, but for people who don't use those organizations, it's going to make them responsible for remitting the tax to the town. The language says they're going to be trustees of the town. I don't know if we've looked into that carefully, making people trustees. The process for that is election. What happens when you take on the liability of more trustees of the town without a proper process? Okay, that's a question that is worthy of consideration. The language of this is cut and pasted from a national initiative. I don't think it's been carefully fitted to what you're trying to do here. So there's a couple of red flags in there that really bear further scrutiny. So again, I urge you to please do not vote in favor of this ordinance. Take a closer look at it if you want to continue. The wording alone, I think, is a little bit scary in terms of the liability the town takes on here. And what happens if these people don't collect the tax then? Are we going after small businesses? I think it's the wrong message. So thank you for the time. Look forward to the rest of the meeting.
Our next speaker is Ray Sarisa. I think I pronounced that right.
Good evening. My name is Ray Sarisa. I live at 357 Shaggy Bark Trail in Morton. I am the general manager of the Doubletree by Hilton in Bloomington, the president of the local Bloomington Normal Hotel and Lodging Association. I also sit on the Sports Commission board, and I'm a member of the Illinois Hotel and Lodging Association. I'm here tonight to thank you for considering the short-term rental local occupancy tax ordinance. The Bloomington Normal Hotel and Lodging Association has over 20 active members, member properties, and our guests are subject to a 12% occupancy tax. 6% of that 12% goes to the state, and 6% goes to the town of Normal or city of Bloomington. A portion of the 6% tax is, or was, I'm not sure if it still is, but from my understanding, is part of the funding for the Bloomington Normal Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. The CVB uses their funds in many ways, in many valuable ways, to promote tourism to our area. They attend trade shows, they market the area, they seek out meeting planners and call on them to bring their conventions and events to Bloomington Normal. The CVB also brings in a large number of sporting events to the area. The attendees and the players stay in our hotels, they eat in our restaurants, they shop in our stores, and they even use short-term rentals. Most of these sporting events require a bid fee. Some of these fees are substantial, but the economic impact from the events often outweigh the cost of the bid fee. Hotel occupancy this year is the lowest in the state of Illinois in Bloomington Normal. Less rooms result in less tax dollars, equaling lower funding to the CVB. Lower funding will result in less spending on the marketing, trade shows, etc. This afternoon, I took a look at the Airbnb site. There are 65 active listings in Bloomington Normal. Not a whole lot, I mean equivalent to a small hotel. I took a look at Champaign-Urbana's Airbnb listings today as well. I counted 305 listings. That's equivalent to the Candlewood Suites in Normal, the Courtyard by Marriott Normal, and the Hyatt Place combined. Short-term rentals are here to stay. They're growing. We're not afraid to compete with them. Our members just want a level playing field and to keep the funding to the CVB so they can continue to do what they do. And we have an excellent CVB here in Bloomington Normal. That's all I got. So, thank you.
Our final speaker is Charles Sela.
Charles Sela, 504 North School Street in Normal. I'm speaking against the tobacco ordinance. At age 18, most citizens can buy a house and sign a binding mortgage, or buy a car and sign a binding note without anyone's permission. They can marry with only the consent of their partner. At age 18, most citizens can volunteer to risk their lives in defense of their country. At age 18, half the population is required to register with Selective Service or face loss of access to some government benefits. With heroin, methamphetamine, and opioids being widely available in spite of being illegal, I think our energies are being misdirected in picking on tobacco. I feel this council is under pressure from a well-organized pressure group and is proposing to ban access to a legal product. Especially treating some citizens as grade school student or less is totally unfair. Getting people to not take up smoking is a good idea. It does not automatically make a good law.
We move on to the omnibus agenda items considered routine and will be handled with one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. I would like to be excused from voting on any bills I may have incurred in my duties as mayor. Motion
Move
for
approval.
approval. Thank you. Items to be considered under the omnibus vote are approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of November 5th, 2018, and approval of Town of Normal expenditures for payment as of November 14th, 2018. A resolution to waive the formal bidding process and authorize a contract with Stark Excavating Incorporated to perform emergency creek bank erosion repairs and stabilization in Sugar Creek for an amount not to exceed $319,000 and authorizing an associated budget adjustment. Resolution waiving the formal procurement process and authorizing a contract with Electronics Recyclers International for the electronics recycling services for calendar year 2019. A resolution authorizing a 3-year contract with Cardno Incorporated for riparian area maintenance in the amount not to exceed $80,000 a year. And a resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement for stormwater education services provided by the Ecology Action Center for a period of 3 years. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The omnibus agenda is approved. We have a couple of items of general orders tonight. The first is an ordinance to approve and implement a privilege tax on short-term rentals within the corporate limits of the town of Normal with an effective date of April 1st, 2019.
Move approval. Second.
Is there comments or discussion on this item? Mr. Preston.
I've got a question, and first, my mic won't turn on, so I'll project, but just so you guys know. The question I have on this, so it mentions in our council packet here, and it was a question that was brought up by one of the speakers, that The tax is paid by the rental guest, and it is collected by the intermediary company, Airbnb or VRBO or the like, and then paid over to the town. If that intermediary, the Airbnb, refuses to collect the tax, then the property owner renting out the room will be responsible for collecting and remitting it. How does that process work if that were to be the case?
Well, I will defer to, I think, Andrew Hune or Brian Day in terms of the actual details of how they send it to us or how it's remitted to us.
If
Is that what you're asking?
Airbnb, says we refuse to collect the tax, and then it becomes a responsibility of, homeowners or the like in Normal to collect and remit that. I mean, is there a specific process for that?
But before we do that, I would point out Airbnb and Homes by Owners and HomeAway all do collect that. I think what we're talking about are there are other organizations that may or may not do it. So I don't think it's fair to single those larger companies out because it is part of their practice.
Fair point.
Right.
Yeah,
They tend to
whatever.
be the most popular, but as we understand it, there's over 100 websites, different websites that people can register their properties on. So I would assume there will be some sort of form that's available to track, for the property owner to track and remit that payment to the town if needed to do it, if they need to do it independently. Andrew, could you?
That is correct. Similar to the hotel motel tax form, we're already in the process, assuming this is passed by council tonight, of creating a form that would be very similar to that tax form. That'd be provided to the property owner or the host that has that particular service available to the public. There'd be an education process, certainly there'd be a marketing process to make sure people are aware of it, but it would be very typical to what we do right now for food and beverage tax and for hotel motel tax. It would just be basically a short-term rental tax that we would monitor monthly with each owner.
Further, Mr. Fritzen.
In identifying the properties within the community that we're aware of that are registered, is it fair to say that a significant percentage of those are in single-family neighborhoods?
I will say there's one across the street from me.
Yes, that is a
Yeah.
safest
So-
statement.
So, we've had some discussion about this off and on and received emails about this over, a period of time, asking that we might consider this at some point. And when I saw the title on it, the privilege tax, it was the first time I'd seen it referred to that way. And one of our speakers talked about that as well. And I guess to me it is a privilege if in my single-family neighborhood someone determines that they want to rent out their home. That's not what I bought into when I moved into a single-family zoned neighborhood. And so I think it is a privilege to operate a business in a single-family neighborhood. We have regulations on daycare and those types of operations within single-family neighborhoods. So I think this is a way to identify that this is a business, and as a business needs to contribute to this in the same fashion that similar businesses do. I guess I would also take a little exception to the logic that says that the large corporations already have all these benefits, and yes, we have extended considerable development benefits to corporate entities, but the complementary jobs and economic activity as a result of that, it's a trade-off. We've made an investment. We haven't just given things away. Those are investments we've made to try to develop economic activity within the community. So I think this is in some ways kind of protecting that investment, that community investment. So I don't have any issue with it in that regard. There was mention, and the word trustee is used. I think as you read that subsection, it's clear that the reference is not to an elected representative of the town of Normal. the collection is done as a trustee, using the word trustee as you would if you looked it up in a dictionary. So I think, I don't know if there's anything else in the ordinance that we feel, do we feel we have any language issues? I mean, that one to me is not
Right. Both
significant.
the points that were made by the speaker, both the privilege tax and the term trustee, are terms of art that are used in tax law in Illinois. Privilege tax, that's a category of tax recognized by the Supreme Court after the 1970 Constitution, is a tax imposed on the consumer rather than on the occupation or somebody engaged in the occupation. In terms of trustee, you're correct that that is used in the fiduciary sense, not in any terms of an elected trustee. And these are terms we use throughout a number of taxes that we've got in the town.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. McBride?
I do think one of our speakers probably brings up a fair point when he talks about, this not leveling the playing field. And I suppose it's just one of those cliches that gets thrown around, level playing field. We know that this is not going to make everything equal. I do think, the large corporations, the large hotel operators, they also have encumbrances, such as employees, that the small operator is not going to have to deal with. I do think this is an opportunity to treat everybody with just a little bit more fairness, and that's within our purview. And let's be honest, people have been renting rooms, spare rooms in communities like ours for a long, long time, for decades. That's not what has changed. What has changed is the technology allowing for the ease of the execution of the transaction, the technology allowing for the ease of amplifying the availability of these rooms. And we're probably just at the very beginning of that. It's going to likely continue to grow. Our job is to adapt to changes as best we can, and I think that's exactly what we're doing.
Ms. Cummings?
Thank you. And thank you to my two council members who have spoken before me. I kind of take a little bit of offense to it seeming as if we haphazardly taken a look at this, when I know there's been discussions that we've had and we've carefully considered this. And not only that, you're right, it doesn't necessarily level the playing field, but it's called, to me, I see it as a fair share. If you were at a hotel, you would pay a tax to stay, and we're just assessing the same type of, I won't say fee, but tax to that as well. It is something that is important to our community. But we want to be able to monitor it. We're not going in and we're not doing inspections. And so those are other things that we would want to look at and talk about. So for us to just do, I feel like if we're just doing just this tax, we're still, I think they're getting off a little on the easy side, because we could be doing a lot more and really putting the hammer down, as they are doing in some communities.
Mr. McCarthy and then Ms. Lorenz.
So thanks for both folks on the side of this issue coming tonight. Again, as I typically say, it's not easy to sit down in front of a microphone in a room full of people and tell us your thoughts, so I really appreciate the input on both sides of the equation. I feel it's necessary to amplify a couple of things that are already said and talk about some of the other things that were brought up in comments. I want to amplify the notion of I believe the term was millions given to our existing hotel businesses. Without being specific, that's hard to talk about. I'm not sure exactly specifically what was being thought of, but I want to emphasize the jobs portion. I want to emphasize that the economic activity that those jobs make in our town is large. Also, the
costs on our hotels, when we talk about a level playing field, I don't think it is. I think the burden is more heavily on our hotel industry, and it probably should be. When you have 200 rooms in a building, there's probably some more things that we should require. Health and safety, fire suppression, pretty hefty construction standards, emergency equipment, testing, all are costs that are on our hotels that are not even being thought of. We're not talking about fire safety systems in individual, I'll use Airbnb as a generic, but the short-term rentals. I agree with Ms. Cummings that at some point that's probably going to be a consideration, because ultimately, as the body who's responsible for health and safety in the community, we're ultimately going to be the ones who are going to be responsible for ensuring that, without much revenue to ensure that all of these individual properties are taking on some kind of measure to ensure that the house next to yours doesn't go up on fire and cause loss of damage to your house because they choose to do it in your neighborhood. I'm a small business owner, many of you know that, for 26 years. I don't have a cool platform that collects taxes for me and remits it to the federal government. That's incumbent upon me as a business owner. Every single business owner has to do that. I don't know why this class of business owners should be any different, because they don't have a website to collect the tax for them. I don't have a website to collect my taxes. I have to remit them directly to the federal government myself. So I'm not sure I understand the logic behind that one. I think overall, this initiative, although we're not in it for the money, as I think we all are agreeing, because the size of the properties are pretty small, you can see in Champaign-Urbana that it spun up pretty quick. And so what we're talking about is private homeowners getting into the hotel business and technology platforms that are ensuring scalability. We haven't had that in rooming houses from the 40s and 50s that my colleague, Mr. McBride. Scalability means speed to market. Speed to market means low barriers, means any of you can decide to get into the hotel motel business and compete against the hotels without all of those zoning and safety requirements. All this is, from a business owner's perspective myself, is that we're at least putting a tax on the people that occupy, not the owners of the houses, but the people that choose to rent them. I think that's, you're right, not fair. It's pretty low bar for us to put on this initially, and I'm sure that we're going to have to at some point come back and look at this topic from the health and safety perspective.
I'll reinforce your point today, Mr. McCarthy. I remitted my October sales taxes to the state of Illinois today on the computer, filling out my 941 and sending those dollars off. Ms. Lorenz.
Okay. You know, I've got a question of more practicality in a moment, but first, I think one of the more scary things I heard in the comments tonight is that this year has been the lowest occupancy rate at the hotels. I think that's a bigger issue, not worth burying on this. That, of course, has a lot to do perhaps with business climate and a number of other factors impacting visitors to and business clientele to our community. So let's not lose sight of that. I don't think this particular action tonight for the short-term rentals is going to make a big difference at this point. Perhaps we are getting ahead of the curve that, say, like Champaign-Urbana is already in the midst of. So I just wanted to make that as a statement up front. Let's not lose sight of the fact that, there's another issue going on here. The practical question that I have, perhaps for staff or Ms. Reese, if she can address this, is how is this enforced, and will there be a lot of time on staff part for monitoring? Something that is still rather small, are we going to be spending a lot of time managing this? Well, I would hope not, honestly,
Okay.
because we did not intend to propose anything that would be administratively burdensome
Okay.
in terms of our staffing. At this point, we can periodically look and do quick checks in terms of what properties might be included on that listing and make sure that we're sending information out and posting the new regulations should council adopt this ordinance tonight. But then it would be maybe spot checking at best or,
Okay.
or checking up on those properties and then I think being more reactive. If we hear complaints from neighbors that properties are being
Okay.
rented out and typically that's how we become aware of those situations, then we can respond accordingly.
So in an odd sort of way, earlier somebody characterized this as, big business versus little guy. To some extent, this will help the little guy who's maybe living next door or across the street from one of these properties, and that there is a touch point now that we can have administratively on the tax.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
That is one of the benefits.
Interesting thought. Okay.
Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah, I failed to mention one other point. I believe Mr. Cerisa brought up the CVB. Kathleen Lorenz and I sit on the CVB board, and we see the large amount of activity and energy and effort and dollars the hotel tax affords in marketing effort from our local convention and visitor bureau. So although the revenue amount is going to be small, the CVB's whole job is to get visitors to our community. And so the short-term rental industry will, in fact, benefit from that directly. The more people we can attract, the more visitors, the more sport tournaments and all of that. Airbnb is not unheard of. When people come to communities, particularly for sporting events, they get on Airbnb, they get on the various travel sites and they look. I've done it myself. I've used an Airbnb before myself when traveling. So I just wanted to underline that point that the CVB does a lot of work and in fact, the short-term rental industry will benefit from that effort as well, from their tax dollars.
Thank you. Further? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item 8 is ordinance amending Division 3 of Chapter 17 of the Municipal Code concerning the regulation and sales of tobacco and other nicotine products to minors and the use of electronic smoking devices in town facilities.
Move approval?
Second.
Oh. I'll let you figure that one out.
I just come in with the second.
Comments, discussion?
If you want.
Ms. Cummings and then Mr. McBride.
Thank you, Mayor. I was one of the people at the meet and greet who was approached about the concern for the legal age of tobacco use. And this was something that kind of hit home a little bit personally, knowing those who have passed away from lung disease from prolonged use of tobacco usage. And it was very interesting to see college-age students that would be this age or younger, advocating for such a cause. We can debate whether or not, what people can do at 18 versus 21, but you can't drink till 21 as well. And it's just as harmful and just as dangerous to the body and the system. I wish we could tell people never to smoke or, that would be ideal. But the realities are, and studies have shown, the longer that you can prolong them from using, the better it can be for them later. And so I am pleased to see this, and I am pleased to see people in that age group standing up and saying, we want this, and we want this now.
Mr. McBride.
I'll try not to repeat too much, but and I think we all had a similar experience, right? Meeting with several Illinois State students that night who were advocating for this, and it was interesting as you talked to them. They were all of them had gotten involved because they knew someone who had lung cancer or something, and then I was quickly talking to them, and smoking is what killed my father. So a lot of us, sadly, have that in common, and I too also applaud our students for getting involved in this, and just to pull back a little bit, how cool is it that we have Illinois State students who have done the work to get this done to try to make a small change for the better in our community. And I know later on tonight we have another item on our agenda with a junior high school student who's done the work to try to make a difference in his community. And I just think that says a lot about the type of community we have. So that makes me very, very proud. So thank all of you.
Further on this item? Mr. Fritzen?
Hey, Kathleen.
No, you and then.
A couple of things. One, in the last item, Mr. McBride referred to how you have to keep up with changes, and I think vaping is something that, call it technology or whatever, has introduced tobacco products to a younger generation in a way that we wouldn't have foreseen not all that long ago. So, this is one of those opportunities to be up with the times, and we dealt with a smoking ordinance a few years ago, that was fairly controversial in the community. This is somewhat of an extension of that, a continuing care about the health of people within the community, and I share their experiences. In fact, I've kept the flyer from that night handy, thinking that eventually this is something that's going to come around. So, for us to consider. Just as I can't pass up the opportunity to do this, so I'm going to piggyback a little bit here. In some of the emails and some of the information that you sent along talked about how the brain isn't fully developed until the mid-20s, folks, and one of the reasons given for prohibiting the purchase of tobacco products until 21 is to protect a few more years of that approaching of 25. And yet the wave is coming in Springfield to legalize recreational marijuana in our state. And it's interesting that some of the reasoning, health-wise and developmentally wise, that are used in this argument to prohibit the purchase of tobacco products until 21 or older are somehow being ignored by those that are going to promote the use of recreational marijuana within our state. So, a comment I read not too long ago said that in relation to marijuana, we found that prohibition is not effective, and I take issue with that. That report right here in this flyer talks about Evanston and the decrease in the use of products by teens because of prohibition. It's one of those dirty words in the United States, because of things that happened almost 100 years ago in our country. But prohibition was effective. It reduced the use. It reduces the use of a product such as this, and the fact that recreational marijuana use still carries some stigma, still has some degree of illegality to it. We don't know how many people don't use it because of those restrictions. And as soon as those restrictions are gone, how many people are going to give it a try? How many people that have, I've stayed away from it because I just didn't want to get in trouble, and now now I know I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm going to go out and maybe give it a try. So I think prohibition is effective. It's just that we don't like those restrictions on our freedoms, and yet I think in the interest of the health and safety of our community, this is one of those laws that you can't really argue against effectively. And I think, from my perspective, this also can be applied to the move within our state to legalize recreational marijuana, which I hope does not happen, but I'm afraid it's coming.
Ms. Lorenz and then Mr. McCarthy.
Okay, I'm wondering about a particular clause in our report on page A2 in the first paragraph there, because there's a part of it that says here, the McLean County Health Department has been planning to promote local regulations in 2019. I want to step back and say I'm glad to see that our health department has already been putting this as a top priority to restrict the use of these kinds of products for those under 21. And I see we have people from our health department here today, so I'm glad that that they've been doing that, and this to me feels like it's consistent with their efforts. They've been marketing tobacco-related health programs to teens, et cetera, et cetera. The McLean County Health Department has been planning to promote local regulations, so they'll continue to do what they've always been doing. We're not asking them to do anything more through this ordinance, are we? Or is that what the intent of your phrase was? Is this,
No,
they're continuing to do what they're going to do?
Exactly.
And this is kind of
ties
running
in.
alongside of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
It complements what their efforts are going to be and their focus in 2019.
Okay, and that was my understanding. I just wanted to clear that up. And then a question, where does the state of Illinois stand on this? And you know, I think the report refers to a number of communities who have done this. Where is the state on this?
At this point, as I understand, it's going through the veto process.
Okay.
So I don't think that has been decided at this point.
Okay, okay. Fair enough. Very good.
Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you. Most of you already said it, so I won't repeat it. It seems to be that we're all thinking on the same lines. One thing I do want to mention, it was brought up about the pressures facing our youth with opioid crisis and all the other drugs. I think it's important to note that a body like ours doesn't have the answers for all of those things. All we can do is hopefully enact some good policy to help mitigate the risk that our youths face from social pressures. But I also want to bring something out that when we bring up opioid crisis and the like, we tend to lean on the notion of that this is a behavioral problem, that it's just simply a matter of a choice. And what we know that the cigarette industry does is put things in cigarettes that makes them addicting. And we know that that's certainly of the illegal illicit drug trade as well. So I think certainly the health benefits of developmental that several of my colleagues have brought up is important, but also to understand that once those kids usually start, it's very difficult to get off. It's not just lazy, it's not just social pressure, but it is a matter of the chemicals that are put in the cigarettes as well. So I think it's important that we give them every fighting chance and keep that out of their hands as long as we can.
And Mr. Preston.
Thanks, Mayor. I will share in so many of the supporting comments from my colleagues up here at the table. Certainly, first and foremost, because of the health implications, as we all know, and certainly we've all talked about here tonight. And also want to highlight, as was mentioned earlier, I love the fact that this is something that came up from ISU students really pushing this issue, driving this conversation forward in our community. That is, in general, that is such a critical aspect of what makes Normal great, is that we've got great people here. And, college students are our single largest demographic in our population. Personally, that's how I first got involved and interested in local government, was by talking about issues and doing so back when we were other things were on the table. And I love seeing that continue, and I'm glad now being on this side of it that it's an issue that we're going to move forward with from that front. In light of that, I guess my only question for staff is dealing with the timing of this. Just because ISU's on break, it's I almost wish that more of our students who were part of this conversation could be here tonight, rather than on their, fall and Thanksgiving break this week. Is there anything specific with the timing as to why this came to us tonight rather than 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks from now?
A week from now. they might be
Not specifically. I had been talking with the city of Bloomington on whether or not they were going to be looking at this ordinance. And I think that if they consider this ordinance, they were looking to consider it at their meeting next week. So we just went the meeting prior to theirs. I don't know yet what Bloomington plans to do, but that's just simply why we picked this date. I actually didn't think about students being gone, so I apologize for the lack of the student representation here tonight. The ordinance would be effective in a couple weeks, assuming council approves it tonight.
And it's very possible that we're getting 20,000 YouTube live stream views right now. All right, thank you.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. We have one item of new business tonight, a motion to approve criteria and analysis for the installation of flashing LED stop signs and authorizing an installation of these signs at the intersection of Vernon Avenue and Grandview Drive, and approving an associated budget adjustment.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, well, I'll just introduce this item. We wanted to share with council the status of an issue that was raised by a local youth. And we're very excited to have this conversation tonight to bring it to your, and basically the public's kind of view. And so I'm going to invite our guest to come forward and talk to you a little bit about why he found this issue to be of concern. And then I'm going to invite the staff that has been working with him to get us to the point of setting some criteria and determining under what situations we want to install some flashing lights around stop signs. Many people aren't really familiar with what we're talking about. The one location in Normal that most people are familiar with is the intersection of Northtown Road and Linden, where we have stop signs with blinking LED lights. And so that's the kind of traffic management system that we're talking about in this situation for the intersection of Grandview and Vernon. So I'm going to invite our guest forward.
So usually we start with a staff report. We get boots on the ground report here tonight, right?
Hi, my name is Jack D. Kurskiter. I'm an 8th grader at Chittix, and I'm in Boy Scout Troop 12 at Our Redeemer Lutheran. I live at 11 Kent Drive, and our house backs up to the Constitution Trail. My brothers and I have all biked through the intersection of Vernon and Grandview to friends' houses over and over again. I began working on the Scouting Citizenship and the Community Merit Badge, where I must choose an issue or topic and interview a member of the government. My mom and I brainstormed ideas, and she talked about this intersection where a car ran the stop sign and accidentally caused the death of Mr. Lanny Lobdell in August 2016. I chose this issue right away because it made me feel sad that Mr. Lobdell lost his life there and couldn't spend any more time with his family. I didn't want any other person or kid from my old school, Colleen Hoos, to die too, when it could be safer for the school in Constitution Trail with a blinking LED stop sign. I met to discuss stop signs with Wayne Aldrich, Director of Public Works, on June 26, 2018. He explained stop signs are placed according to federal guidelines, and this intersection hasn't met a qualification for a change. Mr. Aldrich spoke very accurately about sign placement decisions. He gave me some ideas and how I could get some community support if I felt this was a safety issue that needed looking into further. After this meeting, my merit badge work requirement was done, but I decided to keep going with my family's support. I decided to create a petition and go door to door, gathering input on the intersection and support for LED stop signs from nearby neighbors. I met with the late Lanny Lobdell's wife, Annette, and his son, Chris, to make them aware of a petition idea and get their input. They have been very supportive and helpful. We've met a few times, and they even took the petition around to neighbors on their block and family members. I decided to gather input from more nearby community members and contacted my Colleen-Hoos Elementary School principal, Mr. Adam Brozick. Mr. Brozick agreed right away to create a statement of support for us. In July and August, we spoke with 270 people in surrounding neighborhoods and gathered 266 signatures. Only 4 did not sign due to being new to our community, unfamiliar with the intersection, or simply having a policy of not signing anything. That's a 98.5 signing rate. Also, very significantly, 100% of the houses we spoke to living closest to the intersection signed the petition eagerly. They reported countless cars running the stop sign, weekly if not daily horns, squealing tires and brakes, and various near misses, and many times they have helped as first responders to a variety of levels of accidents. Mr. Aldrich provided me with a ballpark cost estimate for LED stop signs with solar-powered blinking lights and labor and materials. My uncle, Mark D. Kerskiter, then gave me advice on meeting with the Town of Normal Council members, Kathleen Lawrence and Kevin McCarthy. I met separately with Mrs. Lawrence and Mr. McCarthy in mid-August at my house, describing the range of incidents and safety concerns at this intersection. I showed them a map of the intersection in its close proximity to 3 schools, 2 churches, the Cancer Center, the Alzheimer's facility, Constitution Trail access, city bus routes, ISU student traffic, Colleen-Hoos ball fields, and the nearby Anderson and Underwood parks, all making this a very busy and sometimes dangerous intersection. I asked them for their support in installing LED stop signs and any other safety measures at this intersection, and that they were very responsive and wonderful to work with me, representing our community. They went on to meet with Mr. Aldrich and others to discuss safety changes. I was surprised to learn in this process that you don't have to be an important adult or elected person to do something important for your community. I'm thankful to Scouting for starting me on the path to pursuing this change. I'm very grateful to Mr. Aldrich, Mrs. Lorenz, and Mr. McCarthy for taking the time to meet with me and really listen to everything I had to say. This is important and significant to the Lobdell family as well. Thank you for inviting me and my family here today to represent everybody involved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you,
Why
Jack.
don't you stay right there, because council may have some questions for you, and we'll bring staff up.
Yeah, I was going to ask Public Works Director Wayne Aldrich and City Engineer Ryan Otto to join us at the table. They've been working to create sort of the list of criteria that we will be using with discretion in terms of situations where these traffic management systems might be most effective.
Yep, thank you. First, I just want to commend Jack and his great work. Certainly, in the way he approached us, his logic and his politeness and everything was wonderful, and really his community involvement, what he did, really beyond his merit badge requirements. So he really went beyond that. So good job, Jack. So these signs, as you probably know, we don't usually put signs up that aren't specifically mentioned in the MUTCD, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, because that is the standard. That's what keeps things consistent across the nation, and Ryan would agree. So we did, after meeting with Jack, research this a bit more and found some guidance from the FHWA, and that's in your report. So they did a summary report on the use of these types of flashing blinker signs, we call them. And the guidance was very positive, although it hasn't been specifically published in the MUTCD. So what that means is we have to look for our own criteria in the use of those types of signs. And so that's what we did. Ryan's group developed a criteria and analysis method for the future use of these signs. So we have some guidance and consistency. We approached the City of Bloomington engineering staff, and generally they agreed with our approach. As Ms. Reese mentioned, we have used these types of signs before in the community in Normal up at Northtown Road and Linden Street, and that, as you may recall, it's a high traffic, high speed location where we actually added stop signs. And so in that location, it was necessary to draw attention to the stop condition there, and I think that's worked well. And then I know Bloomington has used them, I think, in the same sorts of situation, Ryan, where new sign installation types. So, go ahead.
Yes, the criteria that we tried to outline for you on the in the council action report includes some criteria for proximity to schools, areas where drivers may not expect to see stop signs, long stretches of multi-lane arterials and collectors, for instance, where drivers have a sense of being wanting to continue on through the intersection without noticing the traffic control. So the LEDs would just raise awareness for drivers, especially those that are unfamiliar with the area.
Great. Thank you. Comments or questions? Mr. McCarthy?
Sure.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks for Jack. I want to start out, Jack, I'm going to disagree with you on one small point. You are clearly important. And you clearly have made a difference in our community, so keep staying engaged. I really appreciate it. Always so much to say on this. I live less than a block away from the intersection where my friend Mr. Labdel Laney was killed. I know his wife very well. He was a large part of the Lake Run Club and the running community and was struck while out for his morning run that he took 3 times a week through that route to get to the Constitution Trail. It hit me and our community very hard when we saw that happen. And so Mr. Peterson, former city manager, and I had a conversation about that, and some other things have started in place. But when my wife told me that Jack had knocked on our door to start to talk about that, I'm like, who is knocking, talking about stop signs? And so I was excited to get to meet with you, Jack, and talk about that. And I give you so much credit and thanks for starting this. We talked about other things, I think, in our conversations at your house, and I'll be continuing to pursue some of that in Crosswalk and things that we had conversations about. Staff, thank you for looking into this. I know this is unusual, and you had to dig to do some work to figure this out, and I appreciate you guys rolling up your sleeves and having a look at this. That intersection, the history of that intersection is such that Colleen Hoos no longer allows student crossing guards and no longer allows students to cross at the crosswalks because the danger. As most of you know, I'm a cyclist and triathlete. I run there, I bike there, and it is scary at times. I also want to thank you for the pioneering effort out at Northtown and Linden with these, because we do ride there quite a lot, and that intersection has actually gotten a lot better. I think people aren't sure what to do when bicyclists show up there now, so at least everybody's pausing and not just blowing through there at 45 or 50 miles an hour anymore. So that's it seems to be working up at Linden and Northtown. Jack's parents, thank you for guiding Jack in this process. We know you had a lot of advice, but you let him do this, and you helped him to go out and knock on doors and contact the principal and do this. So, Jack, thanks again, and we really appreciate all you're doing.
Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah, Jackie did an awesome job tonight. I told him, I said, just come to the presenter's table and talk like you talk to us at your kitchen table. It's a little different than your kitchen table, but you did awesome. And I want to also commend you for making this your summer project. I think that was just incredible, and shows a great deal of responsibility, and thanks to his family too for supporting him. Going door to door collecting signatures is not easy, and I really commend you how organized you were and methodical, and you got it done. So adding to that good news story then is what the staff did, and how I could hear from him how helpful you both were, and that just made me really, really proud of to be a resident of this town, to be affiliated in this capacity with the town of Normal. So I'm glad we have a chance to celebrate this tonight.
Mr. Fritzen?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Jack, that you understand how the word warrants is something that this council hears every so often when we have had intersections or traffic situations in the past where you said, can't something be done? And this manual that is referred to, that there have to be warrants, otherwise we expose ourselves to some greater liability. And so this is no small feat to get this accomplished, but at the risk of, almost at the risk of getting gavelled down, when you got done with your report, I just wanted to stand up and cheer. So I didn't, out of, respect for proper decorum at a public meeting such as this, but I think all of us can just say we're proud that you're a member of our community. Thank you.
And Jack, I will add that you should see us after the meeting here. We want to talk to you about the intersection of Broadway and Buford.
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
Inside joke, Jack.
Not to continue, I want to continue to echo many of the sentiments to, as many of my council members. Jack, the work that you have done is amazing. I will tell the two gentlemen on the end there, you better watch out. No, I'm just teasing. It's good to know, though, that we are guiding our youth, because there has to be someone to come after us. I'm not going to sit here forever. Wayne is not going to have his job forever. And we need to know that there are those in our community who are interested and engaged and concerned just as much as we are. And I appreciate that you took on such a task, and you didn't stop. You could have gotten your badge and ended it there, but you saw a need and you wanted to see it through. And I congratulate you. And one thing that you mentioned earlier, that you didn't have to be on council or any of that. None of us, we sit here, but we're all servants, and it takes all of us to make this town a wonderful place for all of us to live. And I thank you for that.
Further comments on this one? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Enthusiastically, aye.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Extra enthusiastically, aye.
Mrs. Cummings.
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. The motion is approved. That concludes our business here tonight. Before taking a motion for adjournment, are there concerns or comments? Mrs. Reese?
Just one. I just wanted to mention that we have a very important staff member who's going to be retiring next week. Sandy Fedden has been with the town of Normal for 38 years, and I just wanted to take a moment, and she couldn't be here this evening, but wanted to take a moment to publicly thank her. She's been the executive assistant in our office, and she has impacted all of us here at the table in terms of kind of keeping us on schedule, providing us with information, making our appointments, and making sure we're at the right place at the right time, and making connections for us. So couldn't be more proud that she has an opportunity to retire and spend time with her grandchildren, but also just want to express appreciation for all that she has done for the town of Normal. She has been a very key person in terms of a staff member and a role model, and has had a lot of impact in our organization. So,
Great. Ms. Cummings?
And as everybody knows how I usually am, it's the holiday season, and I want to wish all of you a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving. And while you're doing so, think of one thing that you could be amazingly grateful for and just say thanks.
Well said. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings.
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. We are adjourned, and we have a request for a photo moment with the council in front with young Mr. DeKersgeter.